And this is the site of Carlton House Palace, and Jane Austen came here.
We're here on Pall Mall in London on what is probably going to be the hottest day of 2026, and we're already melting. The plan is to wander along Pall Mall and talk a bit about it, because Pall Mall was very much a street in the Regency, and there was a lot going on here in the Regency. So that's the plan, and I've been doing some research on it, and I think, Rachel, you're probably going to ask you some questions.
Yeah, I am, but I mean, I just think we want to comment on actually where we are at the moment. Here we've got St James's Palace, except it's quite hard to recognise it because quite a large portion of it seems to be covered in scaffolding.
Okay, so we've relocated, found another patch of shade to stand in, and behind us is St James's Palace. We are currently standing at the far western end of Pall Mall.
And I'm jolly glad that Andrew's telling you that, because I have no sense of direction. I wouldn't know whether we were north, south, east or west. But apparently we're on the western end of Pall Mall.
Yeah, I apologise for the dark glasses as well. These are my brand new varifocals, and they go dark when it's sunny, and it is incredibly sunny here today. Okay, so Rachel, you got some questions for me?
Yeah, I think probably if we'd flip the camera and then you can video me and I can point out the things that I can see from here. Do you really want me?
Okay, so Rachel is currently standing in front of St James's Palace, which, as you can see, is not particularly photogenic right now. It's got this massive set of plastic sheeting out the front, but it is St James's Palace. It's here in West London. And
if I've got my memory right, there's a clock under there somewhere, there isn't there?
Yeah, we've got some wonderful photos of it, but not going to get those today, unfortunately. Anyway, Rachel.
Okay, so well, Andrew's already told you that we've got St James's Palace here. So up on my left up here, we have St James's Street, and this is the street that's famous for lots of gentlemen's clubs. And to our right,
and a particularly smelly waste truck going right by.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere else. Although you can't smell it on the video, we can smell it here. Tell you what. Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so that's St James's Street. Yes.
So this is the view. Behind me is the view down Pall Mall, and on the corner there, you can see one of the famous Georgian shops, which is Berry Brothers and Rudd. And it's in that shop where Lord Byron famously used to go and be weighed on the scales. And it was quite a fashionable thing to do, to go and be weighed on the scales there. And I think we're going to go down Pall Mall, trying to find some bits of shade as we go, because it really is.
Yeah, well, let's talk first about why Pall Mall is even here. Because,
do.
Because there's some history to that. So Pall Mall is linking St James's Palace to what was then London. London was down there. London was half a mile plus in that direction. So Pall Mall, as I said, is behind me. And back in the medieval period, the palace was built. The palace was built by Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, and it was on the site of an old hospital for women with leprosy. And it was a religious institution, and it was one of those places that King Henry took over in the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1500s. And he decided it was a nice place to build his palace because it was a sensible distance from London. London was, as I say, London started half a mile in that direction. All there was around here was open fields. And there was a nice roadway, I suppose, connecting him to London. And the palace really became used a lot more by the Stuart kings, James and Charles I and James and Charles II as well. And they very much used this as and this was their London hub, really. There used to be a palace called Whitehall way down there, in London, which burnt down. And so the royalty moved themselves very much to St James and used that. So this is where royalty was happening in the late 1500s and certainly in the 1600s. And Charles II particularly, I think, had a thing about a game called Pall Mall or Pall Mall, which is kind of like croquet. It involved a mallet and hitting a ball along the ground, sort of cross between croquet and golf apparently. And it required a nice long stretch of green. So they built a Pall Mall court, a long thin stretch of green from here towards London alongside the road. Because in fact the old road that ran into London wasn't there at all. The old road that ran into London was actually there, and now in the back gardens of those houses. And they built this court, the Pall Mall court, and then in the 1660s, for whatever reason, they decided that actually they were going to convert the court into a road into London. And in the 1660s, they started building houses on either side. So at that point, it stopped being green fields and it became a street with lots of different buildings alongside.
So, Andrew, I wonder whether you can explain to me something that's really always puzzled me. So I'm forever muddling up Pall Mall and the Mall. So the Mall is the one over there, the other side. Point with your hand. So the Mall.
So the Mall is, it's over that side, just the other side of St James's Palace. And the Mall is the one is the long ceremonial road that leads from out the front of Buckingham Palace right down to Admiralty Arch and into Trafalgar Square.
But I'm always muddling up Pall Mall and the Mall, and I just really struggle to remember which one we're talking about.
So this is Pall Mall, and so Pall Mall was built on the Pall Mall court.
But why do we have another one called the Mall?
Well, I said the old road used to be over there behind the buildings where the buildings are now, and just the other side of the old road again was the fence marking out St James's Park, the park that was associated with the palace. You know, it wasn't a public park; it was a park that was the royal park. It was where the royals could go and spend their time and could cavort. In the trees and all the rest of it, and when they closed the Pall Mall court here and turned it into a road, they created a new Pall Mall court over there inside St James's Park.
Oh,
and
so what you're saying is the Mall part is both of it are from Pall Mall, but rather than calling Pall Mall and Pall Mall 2, they called it Pall Mall and the Mall.
Yes. So you have Pall Mall, which is an old Pall Mall court. And you have the Mall, which is also an old Pall Mall court. I don't know how long these courts actually were, but they were certainly, as I said, it was a cross between croquet and golf, and it was long, thin and grassy, and perfect for converting into a street when the city expanded.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I hope I'll be able to remember the difference between Pall Mall and the Mall from now on.
Right.
Okay, so we've crossed over to the other side of the
road.
Well,
we've come a bit further down Pall Mall, and we're on the south side, partly because it's the shady side. It's worth noting, actually, that the south side of Pall Mall was, and still is, entirely owned by the Crown. So the King effectively owns all of this, except for one building, and we'll get to that in a moment. The north side, which is behind Rachel, has been in private ownership by lots of different people for a long time.
Okay, so let's go back. So is there any significance to the building that's behind you?
So what's actually kind of a minor interest is the gateway here. So this is the gateway to Marlborough House behind me. And Marlborough House is a very smart building which is behind all of these. And the story goes, and I think all the evidence is there to support it, that 2 or 3 houses along here, it was owned in the 1770s by Edward Walpole, Sir Edward Walpole, who was a son of, son of Sir Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister. Does that sound right, Rachel?
Possibly.
Yeah, probably, yeah. It was the Robert Walpole I was going for.
Sir Robert Walpole was definitely a Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think it was his second son, Sir Edward, and he owned one of the houses just along here. And Marlborough House has got a very grand entrance, and the story goes that Sarah, who was Duchess of Marlborough, wanted a grand archway or driveway from the front of her house out onto Pall Mall. But Sir Edward had bought the house, or was leasing the house, because remember they didn't own it, it was all owned by the Crown. He was leasing the house right in the path of the gateway. And apparently he took great pleasure in refusing to give up the lease, because she wanted to demolish the house to create this gateway. And he was like, no, you're not. And so they've had to create this rather awkward gateway round the side, which isn't very impressive, but that's the story.
So what about the building you're actually in front of? Was that here in the Regency?
So this one on the corner, well, does it look like a Regency building, Rachel?
No, not really.
No. Pall Mall actually has almost, well, no Regency buildings in it whatsoever, actually. St James's Palace is obviously old, built in the 1500s, and there's one house along here which kind of dates from the 1600s. I'll explain that when we get there. But now all of these were built largely in the Victorian era or the early 20th century. So Pall Mall's got a lot of history, but the buildings, and they've got their own history, but very little of it goes back to the Regency era. This particular site in the Regency era was occupied by a family of clockmakers. So this was a clockmaker's shop in the Regency.
Okay, but on the other side of the road, we have got a few Georgian buildings, haven't we? Because we obviously got
No.
Berry and Rod.
No, the Berry Brothers isn't a Regency building, isn't it? Or Georgian. No, they've all gone. They've all been redeveloped over the years. Some of them were bombed in the Second World War.
I'm a little bit confused here because I was under the impression that Berry Brothers and Rudd was a Georgian business, and that certainly the facing we saw in St James's Street dated back to the Georgian.
Yeah, we flipped the camera around now, so Rachel's standing with her back to the building which had the clockmakers in it, and I'm looking at, this is the north side of Pall Mall, and you've got the corner of St James's Street over there. And yeah, that's where Berry Brothers is. And yes, they are businesses that were around in the Regency, and the building frontages on St James's Street, some of those date from the Regency or earlier, but the buildings all along here, the entire length, as I think I've already said, the entire length of Pall Mall, with one or two minor exceptions, has been redeveloped several times. So we're just wandering along Pall Mall now on the south side, as it's the shady side, which is where we want to be today. And so St James's Palace is behind us. We've come along a few buildings, and we're just coming up to Schomburgk House. And Schomburgk House is the survivor. Oh, just before Schomburgk House, we get to this one, which is the plaque reads, "In a house on this site lived Nell Gwyn from 1671 to 1687. Not very Regency, is she, Rachel?
No, nothing to do with the Regency, and I'm always disappointed with blue plaques that read on this site, because basically it's telling me that this is not the house she lived in. So yeah.
Yes, and Nell Gwyn? What do you know about Nell Gwyn?
Mistress of
Charles II.
Charles II.
The clue in the dates.
Oh yeah.
So the significance of this house, it's on the south side of Pall Mall, and I said all the houses on the south side of Pall Mall are owned by the Crown. They're leased from the Crown, except for this one, because this house was given to Nell Gwyn. The freehold was given to her. So we're now outside Schomburgk House. In 1814, I think it was 1814 that Jane Austen went to Carlton House, wasn't it, Rachel? November 1814? Just
it sounds about right.
So
yeah.
In 1814, Jane Austen walked along Pall Mall. And none of the buildings along Pall Mall would she recognise today, apart from St James's Palace at the far end, and this one, Schomburgk House. Because Schomburgk House was here in 1814. It was built in 1698 for the Duke of Schomburg, who was a military leader for William III, I think. And it was later split into three separate buildings. And, well, let's...
But you were telling me a story earlier that you said that one third of the building got knocked down. So
yeah. Let's cross the road and have a look at it from the other side. I mean,
okay.
We'll be going into the sunshine now. Sorry.
Oh, no.
So you were asking a question about Schomburgk House.
Yes. So which part of it was rebuilt?
Okay, so Schomburgk House, built in 1698. It was split, as I said, into three different sections. And the section that's on the left now actually is a rebuild, because the Victorians decided that they wanted to knock down one of the three sections. You've got this lovely frontage, and they knocked down 1/3 of it. And then in the 1950s, they decided they wanted to redevelop it again, but they wanted to keep the frontage. And so they actually rebuilt that frontage, kept the rest of the facade or the frontage, and then they knocked down the entire building behind it. So everything behind that frontage is from the 1950s. It's only the actual facade that dates to 1698. So Jane Austen would recognise what was in front, but what was behind wasn't here in her time.
So what can you tell me about who lived here, Andrew?
So Schomburgk House, so you notice that there are two plaques. There's one up there to Thomas Gainsborough, who was a well-known artist. I'm sure you've heard of Thomas Gainsborough. And there's another, if you come across here, Rachel, you can video up to that plaque there, to Ottobah Cugoano. If that's how you pronounce it, Ottobah Cugoano, author and anti-slavery campaigner, who lived and worked here between 1784 and 1791. Now, what it doesn't tell you is that actually he was servant stroke slave, probably servant to Richard Cosway and his wife Maria. So that's why Ottobah was here. He was actually working for them. And I think they had anti-slavery sympathies. So I guess he was more a servant than a slave. And they lived in the middle section of the house in those years, 1780 in the 1780s and early 1790s. And in fact, the Code Stone plaque above the door it's actually an artist and an artist palette. And it hadn't really occurred to me till we came here just now. I knew it was a Code Stone plaque, but of course Code Stone was very much an item that was made and sold in the late 18th century and early 19th century. So there's a lot of Regency period places have Code Stone in them, artificial stone. And of course, that was long after the house was built. So that plaque must have been added later, and it's got the artist palette. So I'm guessing it was actually added by the Cosways when they lived here. So they lived in the middle section.
So anyone else famous lived here?
Famous, and about famous, kind of infamous. So before the Cosways lived here, Dr. Graham lived here, and this was his Temple of Health. So it was only here for a few short years, but the Temple of Health, and in the main feature of the Temple of Health was his celestial bed. And he reckoned, by the way, he wasn't, although he was Dr. Graham, he was self-appointed doctor. I don't think he had any medical qualifications whatsoever, but he was very well known amongst society. He was highly respected amongst society. That shows you the state of Georgian medicine at the time. But he reckoned he had come up with a cure for infertility. And the cure was that, well, you tried to conceive while you were using the celestial bed. Apparently the celestial bed had organ pipes that played music as you moved about. It had live doves. It had a whole host of other features designed to create the atmosphere, to maximize the opportunity of conception. And it was all in here in the Temple of Health. And the other connection for the Regency is that it's reputed, there's no firm evidence, but it's reputed that Emma Hart, who later became Emma Hamilton, Nelson's mistress, it's reputed that a young Emma Hart was one of the scantily clad nymphs who helped to create the environment around the celestial bed. So on the north side of Pall Mall, I said all the buildings on the north side were privately owned, and a lot of them were various houses and shops, and I don't know much about what was going on in them, but I do know that over there, where it says number 50, that was Almack's.
I'm sorry, Almack's was on King Street. This is Pall Mall.
Correct. King Street runs parallel to Pall Mall. It's the other side here, and there's a little alleyway over there called Angel Court. And I believe that runs all the way up to King Street. Should do. We can walk up it if you want. But Almack's, before he started his club on the Assembly Rooms on King Street, he actually opened a tavern here. And it was in this tavern that things like Boodles began and Brooks began and a whole load of other clubs.
But not in this building.
Not in this building. When I started looking at Pall Mall, I didn't realise that quite so many of the buildings were actually, I'll get out of the way because these folks want to come past. Don't worry, thank you. It is, of course, extremely busy on Pall Mall, as it is all the time. Yeah, when I first started doing a survey of Pall Mall, I thought there's so many interesting historical things happened along here, in and before the Regency. You know, you've got Carlton House, you've got St James's, you've got a whole host of things. Schomburg House with the Cosways, and you know, it was a hub of society in the early 1800s. But I didn't realise when I started this whole process that actually pretty much every single building on Pall Mall today is a replacement for what was here before. So, okay, so we're now walking down this very, very long frontage. This is a huge building here on Pall Mall, the Royal Automobile Club, Rachel.
That doesn't sound very Regency.
It doesn't sound very Regency, does it? And it's obviously occupying loads of different plots. There were lots of other buildings here. There was a Buckingham House here. There was a Marlborough House here. No, not Marlborough House. Cumberland House along here.
Oh,
right.
Let's just pause for a minute, because just on the opposite side of the road, there is an entrance into St James's Square.
Yeah, St James's Square. And St James's Square was built at the same time as Pall Mall. In fact, the whole area across there, the same in the 1660s. I guess this area is known as St James's, and this whole area was constructed pretty much the same time in about the 1660s. There's a map of the 1680s which shows it all. Anyway.
Well, I'm interested to look around St James's Square later, because I've actually put a house there in one of my merry romances.
Okay. The other thing about this building, the Royal Automobile Club, I said, you've heard of Christie's the Auctioneers?
Yes.
Yeah, this is where it started.
Oh, right.
James Christie rented, remember all these are owned by the Crown, he rented 2 houses along here, and he built an auction room in the back garden.
All right.
And he was still using it through the Regency, not as an auction room, but as offices. But certainly in the 1780s and 90s, he was using it as an auction room, Christie's auction room. And there was also the Cocoa. Have you heard of the Cocoa Tree Club?
Oh yes, I have heard of that one.
That was here as well.
Oh right, that was on Pall Mall here.
That was on Pall Mall.
Okay.
That was part of this run where the Royal Automobile Club is now. So so you have the Cocoa Tree Club. The Cocoa Tree Club began as the Cocoa Tree Coffee House, but I guess it developed to it became a club basically.
Yes.
And it relocated eventually later on.
Okay. So do you know where?
To St James's, I think, St James's Street. In fact, a lot of the clubs that began, quite a few clubs began on here.
Didn't you say Brooks? Was it Brooks's that began here?
Yeah, Brooks and Boodles, and the Macaroni Club. The Dilettante Society met along this road as well for a while. They met in a different place. They met in the Star and Garter, which is a bit further along.
I think the Royal Academy was here as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay. Okay, we just stopped outside another house in Pall Mall, and I'm just going to read the plaque.
House? They're all offices.
Oh, offices. Yeah, all right, buildings. So it says Frederick Windsor, 1763 to 1830, gave the world's first demonstration of street lighting by coal gas from a retort located here in June 1807, much earlier than a lot of people think.
Pall Mall is incredibly busy, as it's been for the last 250 years or so. They're busy unloading a load of stuff. I think there's a whole load of wine back there, but I don't think we're going to get it. In fact, this is wine as well here. Right, okay, where were we? So, yeah, Frederick Windsor.
Can you tell us about this guy, Frederick Windsor?
Frederick Windsor, he wasn't British, I think he was German. And he came up with this idea of coal gas. Probably wasn't the first person or the only person to be thinking on that, but he's the one who really pioneered it. And he was able to get permission. He had to get permission from the street authorities, from the paving committee, I think they were called, to erect a lamp post outside the front. And he got permission eventually to erect 13 lampposts from here, stretching down towards St James's. And he lit those using gaslight in, I think, 1807. 1807. I think it was being used a bit more regularly. It wasn't used every single night. Permanent gas lighting didn't actually start for a few years later on some of the other streets around here. But he regularly gave demonstrations. I think one of the first times he did it was for either the Prince of Wales' birthday or George III's birthday, one or the other. He had to get permission from, in fact, I think he gave the demonstration in the gardens of Carlton House, which is just up there, which we'll get to in a moment.
Okay.
So he got permission from the Prince Regent or the Prince Regents, whoever's, who gave permission to demonstrate gas. But yeah, gas lighting. So again, Jane Austen wandering along here in 1814. Well, there wasn't gas lighting on here in 1814, but if she'd been a few years earlier, she may well have seen some early examples, demonstrations of gas lighting in use.
So why have we stopped here, Andrew?
So behind me, further up Pall Mall, is Trafalgar Square. And the big building that dominates Trafalgar Square is, Rachel?
The National Gallery.
The National Gallery, yes, which is where all the pictures are. But the National Gallery didn't begin on Trafalgar Square. In fact, the National Gallery celebrated its 200th anniversary a couple of years ago in 2024. And it was established in 1824. And the first collection was actually displayed in a building on this site, or round about here. It was partly on the roadway, actually, which is behind Rachel. There's a roadway there. Again, as I said, all these buildings have been demolished and replaced, but this is where the National Gallery began, and it didn't move to Trafalgar Square until the 1830s.
Okay, so this is one bit on Pall Mall I know something about, because we did some video here a while back, and this is the site of Carlton House Palace, and it would have faced onto Pall Mall, and Jane Austen came here to visit the library at the Prince Regent's request via his librarian, Reverend Stanier Clark, and so this is where she came.
And as you said to me just now, when I talked about Jane Austen actually walking along Pall Mall, you said she probably didn't.
Well, I can't really believe that she would turn up at Carlton House on foot, can you? I think she probably would have taken a carriage. But anyway, this is where Carlton House would have been, and I was intrigued. I've been intrigued walking along Pall Mall. How, you know, considering how many old buildings we have in London, how few Georgian buildings that there are on Pall Mall. But Andrew tells me that the ones opposite here are some of the oldest. And these were 1830s. You said that it was the home to the Athenian Club, is that right?
That was built for the Athenian Club, and as far as I'm aware, the Athenian Club is still there. At least their website says that they're still there.
Oh, right,
and then there's another club just along the Travellers Club, which is also still there. So those next two buildings just along there were actually built in the 1830s. So not Regency, but late, very late Georgian. And they are, I guess, now some of the oldest buildings on Pall Mall.
Is it Georgian, though, or is it William something or other? Because technically William was king from 1830 until 1837. So, Andrew, I understand that the Royal Academy met originally on Pall Mall before it moved to Somerset House. So, is this where it was?
Yeah, more or less this is where the Royal Academy met. Again, it's one of those Pall Mall buildings that's been demolished and replaced. Right next to where Carlton House was. Trafalgar Square is just a little bit further up the road. We're on the eastern end of Pall Mall. And yeah, 1768, Royal Academy came here. 1769, they held their first exhibition. And they've held their exhibition every year since, until today. It's an unbroken sequence. But they moved to, where did they move to? Somerset House.
Somerset House. Yeah, I'd just like to point out that it was a summer exhibition in all except 1 year. I believe in the year of COVID, it was held in the autumn.
Yeah, but I've not seen it referred to as the summer exhibition in the Georgian era. It's always referred to as the exhibition or the great exhibition.
Yeah, the exhibition in the Great Room.
The exhibition in the Great Room, that's
the Royal Academy exhibition. We really ought to walk down there.
You think we ought to walk down there?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll walk down there. So we're just walking down the last bit of Pall Mall now towards Trafalgar Square, which we can't quite see. It's down there somewhere.
So technically we're in Pall Mall East now, end of Pall Mall, and it's kind of fitting really as we Regency people that behind me is an equestrian statue of George III. If Andrew scrolls round, you can see the National Gallery in the distance. Can't see Nelson because His column is hidden behind the buildings.
We've strolled up and down Pall Mall today in the heat. I hope you found this interesting, useful. You got a bit of an insight into what Pall Mall looks like today, and I hope you got a little bit of a taste of what the history of the street is. We've had a fun time, but it's exceedingly hot, and I think we're now going to go and find somewhere to have a cool drink.